Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the ComicBase Livestream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and we'll be here for the next hour or so talking all things comics, comic-y, and comic-basey related. Let's get on to it. The big topic of the show today is, on the other hand, going to be variance. We did some really deep dive look at how they've changed over the years. We'll be sharing that information with everyone as we go on. The graph is shocking. I'll spoiler it that much right now. Anyway, before we get going though, please like and subscribe if you haven't done already. Melee that notification button, and please also post your questions in the chat to @ComicBaseTV, and I'll hit as many of those as I can. Before we get going, we'll also be sharing some ComicBase news, a lot of it actually, a fair amount of Atomic Avenue updates, and then we'll get onto the variants. Anyway, so Andre, first up, you win today, and by the way, before you even get into that one, it's like if I'm a little strung out, it's like, yep, I think I had the same night last night anyone in America did, and it's like, wow, that was a thing, and it'll be really interesting in a couple 3 weeks when we know who all our new elected representatives are, because that's apparently also a thing we do these days now. So elections are too much fun for just one night, so we have to keep it going for a season. Anyway, Richard Scott out in PDX, nice to see you. Ed Billiot, nice. Rob, and last sunny days here. Let me know if we have a cloudy day variance. Yeah, I not today. Anyway, let's see here. Greg Heck, the mod, is in the house, and so spammers beware. Looks like we got Mr. Price, Agent DeCamp, Jet City Comics, and yeah, hey everyone. Well, we'll get to it. And to anyone who's joining us for the first time, please, don't be shy. Please post your comments to @ComicBaseTV in the chat. We'll hit as many of them as we can. But let's get on to the show. So first up, we have the new ComicBase update. I believe we're up to build 2018. So 23.0.0.2018. I'm holding off just for the moment on pulling the trigger on the 0.1. That'll force it to be an automatic update for everyone, because I wanted to make sure we've nailed down a couple of little futzy issues before we go. But I'm hoping to do that maybe later on this week. So speaking of variants, one of the some of the new features of the new build are we now automatically add variant types up to the variant 250 when you start the program up. So yes, if you have variants with that many covers of the same issue, that's now a thing that ComicBase will handle gracefully, and it'll add the things automatically, when the first time you run it. And you say, why would we do that? It's because someone figured out a magazine that had well over 200 variants on it, and that's going to be part of an update coming up shortly. So good grief. Other things going on. We have improved the scrolling algorithm. Yeah, we did just a couple more little tweaks on it. Let us know what you think of it. I hope we're hitting the sweet spot now between the one, basically having it be fast enough so the pictures are, catch up with you, and also responsive on both fast and slow machines. But if you have any, gripes with how it's performing right now, please try the latest update. And if it's not working for you, let us know. Support at comicbase.com. We want to pull the trigger on this one, like I say, as soon as we can. And let's see what else we got going on here. We fixed a minor cosmetic bug with, if you did a quick change of condition, it asks a couple of questions. One of them is, did you want to change the price to match the new condition? The other one is, do you want to update the price history as well? Depending on your screen magnification, some of those things were overlaying each other, and that's all fixed now, so thank goodness. We have better updating of those secret date fields I mentioned last time out. So the program now in the latest incarnation is keeping track via a couple of fields that they're not on by default, but they will keep track of the last date that a value was changed. So in other words, the current guide value, and the last date that the quantity for that given issue was changed. And so those are all searchable fields. You also can go under the setup menu go down to columns to view and scroll down to the bottom, and you can find those ones if you, for some reason, want to show those in your grid. I don't know why you'd want to, but that's a thing you could do. Where it's, I think, more interesting is if you say things like, find me all the comics I've bought or sold in the last 60 days. You could say find all the ones where the quantity has changed during that time, and that'll give you that list. But don't it's a feature going forward. So basically, it's starting. Think of it as starting working now, and it'll be useful as many days in the future as we use it. It won't have the dates going before in time. So if you haven't been using the preliminary versions for 60 days, it doesn't have that data yet, but it will as you go. In the new version of that one, it handles both updates via the downloading the content update, grid changes, quick changes, mass changes, and I believe also double-click edits. That's the new one on that one. I know I'd remember it. All right, and last question on that one. Final reminder, everyone. We announced this last couple of live streams, is that we've done some work to dredge all the historical archive sales off of Atomic Avenue and get them into the new API e-commerce format. But some of the limits are, if for some of the older records, and depending on how you've changed your database or not changed your database over the years you've been using Atomic Avenue, we might not have your database identifier tied to your account. So if you are logging in and doing a check for sales and says you have some old records, but they don't, it prompts you again next time, even if you say I want to process them. What that means is that those records aren't tied to your database ID properly. So if you want us to handle that one, please go into, I don't know, matter of fact, I'll switch over there and show you exactly where it is. Switch my cursor. Go in your ComicBase, go up to the top left here, go to collection statistics, give it just a moment to grind. All right, and when this window comes up, the collection statistics window, go over to the database info icon over here on the right, and tell support that you'd like all your old sales records credited to the very long number that you have there, which is the way that we uniquely identify your database on the server end of things. Now, only do that if you actually want them assigned that one. And honestly, if you've been using more than one database over time, maybe this isn't the right move for you. But if you want everything credited into one database, that will do it for you. And send a note to me, P. Bickford, at human-computing.com, and we should be able to take care of that for you. All right, let me go back to get my cursor back here, take Rob's comment off the screen so we're not watching it, even though the weather is lovely, and I'm glad to see that. Oh yeah. Who just died? We lost another great one. Who? Oh, did I miss it in the chat? Mark Jewelers Variance. Okay, so apparently we lost somebody, but I don't know who. Let me know. Oh, wait, we've got one in there. Oh, Carlos Pacheco. Damn it. Oh, you're right. Okay, well that would do it. Oh, sorry, man. All right. Well, all right. So now on back to much happy news. Let's see. We have ComicBase TV. Speaking of MJ things I've submitted lots and they still aren't added. Okay, so backing up what the heck we're talking about with that one, let me go ahead and pull up my chroma key over here and switch back over to, I'll switch it back over to the main camera, which one of these days I'm really going to write that into the macro to turn off the inset. So if you have ever wondered for yourself what an MJ variant is in ComicBase, that stands for Mark Jewelers. And basically what they were is they were special versions of comic books. They're primarily meant for PXs and bases, where they were, targeting. They basically Mark Jewelers had a jewelry insert so you could buy your sweetie, engagement rings or pendants or whatever you want. But they were specifically targeted servicemen who suddenly, had girls who they might want to romance when they finally got out of base and might actually have some spending money on their hands. So those are you see them in ComicBase as MJ or Mark Jewelers if you print out the label on those ones. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of those. If you don't see your work, and this is just general news, anytime you submit corrections and they didn't get processed right away, feel free to post a follow-up note to support@comicbase.com. That'll go to the editors and they can tell you where they're at on those. I'm not sure if there was an issue with the submission or whether they just haven't gotten around to it yet. I know we've been blasted with content lately, so it's possible they're just backlogged. I've been so blessed I haven't had a chance to even check in with folks today, so we'll let you know. Okay, so other things going on. Okay, yeah, so on Atomic Avenue, we have a number of updates to that one, and I'll even show you a few of these. So let's go back over here, put myself in the upper right-hand corner, and magnify the screen down. All right. So that's ComicBase. Let's close that window, and let's pull up a web browser and go to not that one, but we'll be talking about that in a little bit. Want to share some of my favorite tech tips that I've discovered lately, because yes, there's never a shortage of things to find out about Windows, and I found out some cool ones this week I thought I'd share with you. All right, so back on Atomic Avenue, which is the sister site to ComicBase, it's basically an online marketplace that if you want to sell your books, it's very easy in ComicBase. Just mark them as for sale. Use the post items for sale to Atomic Avenue command, and you have an instant store with all your inventory that you've marked at the prices you've marked as for sale. The transactional model is basically identical to that of Amazon.com's used books. So basically, you've already sold the books, or you've already priced out what you want for the books. When people find something they like and the condition they want, they just add to their cart, they check out. You get a note saying, hey, go ahead and ship this book. And 2 weeks after you mark it as shipped, you get a reimbursement, less commissions from Atomic Avenue. I think the commissions are something like 15% plus some whatever the credit card fee is per item, because the commission also includes all the financial processing charges, which is really the majority of, I understand, what that's all made of. Anyway, but Atomic Avenue is a number of cool things. I got pulled into this pretty hard in the last couple of weeks. I'm trying to escalate. I've got a wish list of things that I want to see done on the system, and the deal was that if I add a lot of oomph to the especially the integration parts around ComicBase, that my own wish list get pushed further to the front. It's a little bit of a deal with the devil on that one, but anyway, so another reason I'm not sleeping too great these days, but we'll take it from there. So things that are new, and some of these are popular requests. So if you go under Find Now, you first of all, a lot of the artist writer and things like that, a lot of these finds were not spectacularly well populated from ComicBase. They're now in much better shape, but we finally have cover artist. So now you can do things like saying, hey, show me all the covers that are in stock by John Byrne, for instance, and pop that in. Boom, here they are, and these are all the ones you can buy for sale on the system and so forth. You can do that for any cover artist. Also, the searches for artist, writer, a number of other things are all working much better now, I think. Other things that are neat, shipping info when you view an order. So let me go to an order of mine. The system, the way Atomic Avenue reimburses shipping is it basically figures out what the weight of the books would be, where it's going to, and so forth, and it charges the buyer enough to cover that, plus a little bit for the cost of the materials and insurance if you're dealing with very expensive orders. Anyway, so some of the things that it used to use in its calculation, but it never used to show you before, was how many packages it thinks it will take to ship the given order, and whether or not it calculated it using flat rate shipping, because the system tries to figure out the cheapest way to send the books that'll get it there in a decent way. And if you're sending like about a dozen books or something like that, a lot of times it'll be cheaper for you to send it using a flat rate packaging as opposed to normal packaging and so forth. If you're very experienced in shipping, you probably got this all worked out, but if not, at least tells you where the reimbursement was based on. I don't think the system cares about how you ship it, but it at least tells you where the rate basis came from for reimbursing. So if for some reason you are going to ship things out and the shipping reimbursement comes back, it seems like it's not enough to cover the cost of the books, that'll give you some clues as to where the thinking was, and maybe some ways you can change it up. and this particular order, these are books that I'd sold out, where on my particular store, I have a $50 domestic free shipping threshold. So this is a guy who bought Legion of Superheroes Archives number 11, and just as expensive enough of a book, I think a $350 book, just to get over that $50 level. So you get the score the free shipping. That's why shipping is 0 on this particular order for me. But your mileage will undoubtedly vary. All right, other things that are kind of new and kind of cool. Oh, you can now regrade. This has been a big ask. You can now regrade parts of a multi-part order. I'm sorry, a multi-copy order. So, for instance, if I had gone and sold 5 copies of a free comic book day special, and I go to pull them, and I realize, oh darn, I can't lay my hands on the 5th copy. Your choices in the past used to be that you could only, call the guy up, beg for mercy, try to swap in something else, or cancel all the 4 issues that you did have in stock. There was no way to adjust the quantity or do anything like that after the fact. Same thing goes with, like, let's say a guy orders 2 copies of an issue, and one of them's just fine, but the other one, I realize, as I'm shipping, it had a corner ding in it. Nowadays, you can regrade issues, and it'll say, well, hey, I noticed there's a problem with this one. I'm lowering the price and the grade. Would you like to buy it at the different price? It prompts the buyer for that if that ever happens to you. But if it was ever multiple issues on the same of the same lines, you could never. It was an all or nothing kind of proposition. That now no longer is the case. Now, if you have 5 copies of a free comic book day and you say, well, no, I only have 4, go to that line. When you do the cancel or the regrade, if that's the only line that's selected, it'll prompt you for how many you want this regrade or cancel to affect, splits the lines up and handles it from there. And it actually works reasonably slick. All right, and then the last thing I'm working on at the moment for them, before I get to the thing I really wanted to do, not that I'm griping, is we're doing some address standardization. So one of the things, USPS, the United States Postal Service, has a big API they use a lot. Everyone goes through it, where if you've ever entered your address and then you go to ship something and it says, well, that's not exactly the way the Postal Service wants to see your address. It wants the apartment up on this other line. It wants DR instead of drive. It wants everything in all caps. We're working so that both the ComicBase.com and the AtomicAvenue.com systems will automatically verify and standardize addresses as you're signing up for the system, so that it takes down the level of grief of people finding out later on that they miskeyed their address and something's just a little awful, and then people have to call and say, hey, I can't ship this book to you. The post office is saying this isn't a valid address, or it's giving grief about where the apartment building goes and all this other nonsense that can slow things up. So we're working through that to make that part of the profile and the account sign up processes, so that as soon as you enter your address information into ComicBase or Atomic Avenue, it all gets in exactly the way the post office wants to see is to mail you a package. So kind of boring stuff, but this is the stuff that life is made of. So that's what we're doing now. Okay, let's see what's going on back in the chat, and then let's talk variants. Good grief. If we have any time at the end, I will try to get back to Asia Camp wants more of me. I missed other earlier questions. Let me scroll backwards. Okay, so Asia Camp says the True Believers book started out as alternate prints, went to their own titles, now back to alternate prints. Should they be their own title or not? I don't know. So the True Believers prints, what those are is certain popular comic books. I don't know, let's say Dr. Aphra, which I just happen to have sitting right here. I'm not sure if this is a True Believers one. Actually, this is a Trick or Read, as they're doing this one. It went, issue number 1, printing number 1 came out. It became a popular series. That thing became worth money, and then later on, Marvel says, "Hey, we're not going to leave money on the table. We're going to go back to press with this thing." And one of the ways they go back to press with things, and also use it to introduce people to titles that they think they think that they've got some legs. You might like them, is they'll do these True Believers reprints after the fact. So it's usually very cheap. It's usually like $1 or so, where they'll go back and reprint the same issue, and it might have come out before as a second printing on its own. It might have been done any number of different ways. For instance, the Dr. Afra one here was done as a trick or read. I believe the way that these are typically being indexed by folks is to treat them as a printing within the given title. So even though it just says issue number 1, Dr. Afra or something like that, it'll say, well, yeah, the True Believers reprint is really issue, printing number 4, etc. And the best way to find this stuff in any case is really just bleep it in and see where it took you. That being said, I will raise it with when we have staff being out. I will talk to the content guys and see what the current thinking on some of these are. It's good for me to check in with these guys periodically because there's so much wacky stuff going on in the industry. Even I can't follow all of it. And so if anything comes back much different than what I just told you, I will try to comment in the next chat. All right, did I miss anything else? I hope not. Scrolling. Okay, I don't see anything else for now, so let's go on with the show. Okay, Variance. Good grief. All right, we know them, we hate them. Oh, well, maybe we do or maybe we don't, but it's one of these things that seemed like a good idea back in the 1990s and has just become just psycho cuckoo ever since. For instance, we're on Action Comics. Let's see if they celebrated issue number 1000 by doing anything special. 1000's a big number. So I'm using the jump command. That's F3. I'm just typing in 1000. And it's going to take me down to the first. Oh, there's issue number 1000 of Action Comics. Okay, nice cover. And there's a blank sketch variant. There's variant by Dan Jurgens. Actually, quite a few variants. A, B, C, D, F, G, M. And now after Z, which was the biggest number we had, that's the Zeeth variant. I believe that one is the was it Newbury Comics cover by Patrick Gleason. After that, we a number of years ago had to adjust them up so that, anything after Z is now the V27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, etc. And it just goes on from there. Well, number 1000, God bless, only has to date 46 variants. Of course, nothing saying they couldn't go back later and do another one, because people often do. They'll print out not only the ones that they solicit at the time of publication, but then they'll also come back later on and do ones that they will use for special promo events, for shows, and so forth. And yeah, you can do it years after the fact. There's no end to variants. So anyway, a number of years ago, a guy called up and said, "Hey, you've got this big database of comic books. Could you dredge up some information for me about exactly how many variants there have been over time?" Because I sense that he's writing an article for a website called Sketched. I guess it's short for Sketched, and he wanted to have some raw data, to support the feeling he had that variants were getting kind of psycho cuckoo. So I went and did that, and gave him V1 of that a number of years ago, and at the time it was bad. But there's now he came back and wanted an updated list, and I thought, you know what? This is clearly an issue that's not going to go away. So let me go and spend a couple hours and drag up all the numbers from 1935 on, concentrating only on US for the moment. And let's talk about, and let's zoom in on this one. So what this is US comics starting in 1935. How many comics were published during that year? In other words, cover dates that are known during that year. This is not the definitive list. I mean, there could be comics that were published that we just don't know the cover date on, in which case that number might get added to along, as we go. But for comics, where the cover date was somewhere in 1935, there were 117 US comics. So easy to collect them all back in the day. 0 variants. So variants formed a whole 0% of the market. Matter of fact, we did not see the first variant, call it, in the US comic market until 1939. And bonus to anyone in the chat who can tell me what that variant is. It's a very, very famous variant. And it recently it's famous mostly because it was not an officially produced variant. It just kind of became famous because of the comic book that it was and the particular history of that issue. And like I say, whoever names it in the chat, I'm going to be very, very impressed. But anyway, starting in 1939, basically they broke the streak. It was on. You started seeing, 4 variants in 1940, 3 variants next year, 1 variant in 42, war years, and then you started seeing a couple little things moving around. Now, typically these would be things like ads on the back cover would be different. For different markets, they might sell, a different ad or something like that. They might, and Richard Scott got it. It is indeed the Marvel Comics #1 Payday Edition. What this was, it's Marvel Comics #1 was the first appearance of Namor, of the Human Torch, of Kazar of the Jungle, the Angel, which is different than the Angel that was in the X-Men later on. And by the way, I just read it. I reread it a couple of weeks ago, and it's terrible. I feel like there's no way to dress it up. It's a very important comic, but it wasn't good. Joe Simon got to be much better later in life, as did, well, frankly, everyone who stuck with the comics industry got much better. But primitive days. People were just learning the craft back then, and some of it was not everything it would eventually become. But there was one copy that they kept around the Marvel offices at the time where they scribbled in it about who did what stories when and how much they got paid. And this thing recently got sold at auction for like $1 quadrillion. But yes, it's the earliest known U.S. variant that we're listing in the database right now. All right, so, but anyway, going on down the list, you see that things are really running at a very low boil. I mean, it's, you've got regional variance, sometimes as you were experimenting, moving, will the universe, will it tolerate a 12-cent comic book, which was a real question when everything was 10 cents, or if I got to have a version that, goes up to canon, so I'm going to mark it differently. This was the sort of thing that would comprise these variants back in the day. 1957 saw a lot of this one over here. We suddenly have a big pump in the whole thing, and this is a combination of two different things. It's typically it's Whitman's. There were comic books that were dual branded as both Dell and Whitman. There are ones that were price variants because, again, by 1957 it was getting very hard to keep a comic book for 10 cents going, and also the distribution was moving around enough that you started seeing things that were crossing territories more. But even then, really nothing terribly important is happening. Let's scroll forward a few years. We're talking about tiny portions of the market. Now, by the way, also notice the total number of comic books on the market started at 117. By 1942, you have 1,040 different issues coming out. During the course of the year. A decade later, that number had doubled. So the comics market's doing pretty good up until somewhere around in the 50s here, where you guys might remember this is where kind of the bottom fell out. And this was the end of, they call it the atomic age of comic books. And up until when the Silver Age came in, superheroes had kind of gone away. You're down, the things that were actually selling any kind of numbers in the whole thing. The Comics Code came in right around here. You see that, 1954 was a great year. 55, a little down. 56, markedly down. And you actually had a pretty good decline for the years following that one because, honestly, all the fun comic books stopped being published. That's when EC Comics and a bunch of the more lurid, crazy, covers in the ones where you could have, vampirism and, The Walking Dead and gore on every page and, you name it, all the things the Comic Code was there to, killjoy its way out of existence. It did a number on the market, and the comics market was not doing great right up until later on when superheroes came back in the start of the Silver Age. You started having things start reversing the trend right around there, and then superheroes came back in a big way. And eventually, you started. By the time you got to the 70s, you're exploding the number of titles out. This is the number of U.S. issues put out by all the U.S. publishers. But we had a show a number of weeks ago called That 70s Feeling, where it seemed like in 1973 and 76 or something, Marvel in particular was just putting out anything that would stick to the wall. They were trying, black this, black, black everything. Both companies were, Black Falcon, Black Condor, Black Lightning. They were relaunching a series that had failed in trying different things. They were getting into every genre you could possibly imagine, letting it run for a dozen issues to see if anyone's going to pick up on it all. The good news is you saw a bunch of neat characters come up. I mean, everyone who the Marvel Cinematic Universe current phase is made of, starting with Black Widow, another black character that's not black at all. And going on through Moon Knight, things like that. These are all, had their genesis in the 70s when Marvel was just throwing stuff out like crazy. And they were really kicking up. But another thing was happening simultaneously is you started seeing much more stuff going on with just weird little variations on things. Some of these are marked jewelers, some of them cover price variations. But yeah, you had a number of things where, like, yeah, there isn't necessarily just one copy of the comic book. And then, things getting pretty tame all the way through the 80s. You're really pumping the number of titles come 87. I mean, look at that. We're up to 3,667 issues that came out during the whole thing. By this point, you'd had the independent explosion. So basically Marvel and DC had an absolute stranglehold on the comics market. But then suddenly you saw everyone from First Comics, Pacific, Eclipse, and then suddenly everyone and their brother, Aardvark Vanaheim, everyone was getting into the comics game. So the sheer number of issues was going way, way up. So that you see a huge amount of diversity in just the offerings that the comics were having. But again, notice how the number of variants out there still very, very low, right up until the 90s. So in a single year, 1992, we doubled the number of variants from the year before it. We went from 2.4% of the comics out there, and at this point, we're putting out 4,177 comics. We doubled it to 5% in 1 year. This is when everyone discovered the chromium, issue, the hologram, red ink, foil, gold, you name it, etc. Next year, doubled it almost again, 9.4% of the market in 1993. Took a little bit of a break in 94, then right back at it then. And then ever since then, it's been just way up, 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 up. So 96, you're at 11% of the market. By the end of the decade, 2000, you're at 16%. A decade after that, 2010, we've more than doubled the percentage of comics in the market that are variants. We're up to 38% of the market by 2010. And then that brings us to today. Now, I don't have the figures for 2020. 2022 is incomplete at this point because we're still having comic books that hit the stands that still are going to come out with 2022 markings. We'll know the end of this number at the end of it. But as of 2021, the end of the year, 77.8% of the comic books on the market were a variant of one sort or another. And look at just the sheer number of comic books. So basically, you have, in 2021, 16,457 comic published of one type or another, almost 13,000 of which were variants. So you're still only talking about 3,500 or so unique comic books on the market. They just sold them to everyone 4 times over on average. This, guys, is nuts. And if you want to get an idea for how nuts that is, everyone loves pictures. Here's the pictures over time for that same thing. If I can get the graph to appear. Come on back to me. There we are. So this is US comic variants over time. And it's like Ozymandias, behold my works and weep. Actually, so what this is, the orange line is the number of variants. The blue line is the total number of comic books. See, here you have the genesis of the comic book industry. You have a peak. Essentially, you see different peaks. Now, remember, this is number of issues. This isn't circulation. Circulation is a whole other topic, but in terms of unique comic books being put out during that year, little bumps now and then starting in 1991, oh Nelly, look at that curve. Now you will also notice that sometime around here, things took a marked shift downward. What could have happened during those lean years where suddenly they weren't putting out a lot of comic books and they weren't putting a lot of the percentage of variants was about the same, but the number of comic books that were put out, it just went to hell over the course of a couple of years. And we've now bounced back, fallen off just a bit, but again, I don't know how much of this last tail point here is just the fact that not all the comic books for 2022 have come out yet. So this is the data as of 11/2 of this week. I guess I could update it later on, but honestly, this took enough time to dredge the data that I'm, well, the good news is I had to write some code to make it happen, but the other side of it is I'll probably wait a little bit before I pour in the full numbers on that one. But this is nuts, guys. I don't know another word for it. Because what we've decided to effectively do is instead of if you were to look at the actual circulation numbers at the same time, and I know there's just enormous controversy about how real were the figures back in the 40s when a lot of people would claim that the comic books were a convenient way for the mob to launder money with inflated things like that. But even then, it's clear that if you'd seen a comic stand or a comic shop at the time, they were moving product back then. I mean, many things were going out the door. And if you look at your comic store, your comic shop today, man, thin pickings. And what you do have is spread out over a jillion different copies of the same issue. It does not help, by the way, that some of the variants that you can buy these days are ones that you need to buy a certain number of original comics to even be allowed to order the variant. So, there's 1 in 10 retailer incentives, 1 in 25. I've seen it go as high as 1 in 500. You literally have to buy 500 copies of a single comic to be given one of the special retailer incentive ones. And when you suss that out over, say, a $5 or $6 comic book and say, I've got to lay out $3,000, in retail, which even with, a decent shop discount, you're still talking, $1,500 just to get one copy of that variant. That when you put that variant up for sale, you are going to charge at the moon for it. If you can find the one guy loaded enough to want to actually pick it up. But I'll just say, look, I've got some concerns. Not only does this make comic collecting really kind of a hassle. We've done a lot of work in ComicBase just to make it possible to manage all this stuff. But it becomes, we've had to devise whole designation systems to deal with the huge numbers involved. I mean, we're talking now about magazine 250 variants of the same issue. We've had comic books that have well over 100 variants of the same issue. I think the current high in ComicBase right now is like 146, something like that, for comic books. But like I say, it's changing in like a week or two. And it doesn't seem to be letting up. And the reason it doesn't let up is because in a market that's getting more and more select, it's like Spinal Tap. It's like they're not getting less popular. Just their appeal is becoming more selective. Newsstand comic books, the floppies, the things that you'll actually find in a comic store, are not moving the kind of overall numbers that they used to have in a while ago. And I've gotten some scuttlebutt from different comic retailers, talking about their actual numbers over time, and it's like just horrifying, what a drop off this has been. And it's not also helping that you're not only not moving as many copies to people, but you have to split your order between 2 or 3 different distributors. You've got things like going like that. The bright spot are things like trade paperbacks, which they don't have variants so much as they have printings. You'll take the same copy of Watchmen and print it like 27 times, which that's a great sustainable business for if you've got those kind of properties. But when you've just got, the latest issue of Amazing Spider-Man and you're going to print 50, 60 copies of it just because it's a big round number issue or something like that, man, you just got to wonder how much you're just burning out your collector base. Anyway, what do you guys think? I'm curious. Let's see here. All right, Armand says, for the total number of issues per year, how's that arrived at for later years that include manga, etc.? These are U.S. Cover dated comic books. So in other words, they have to be U.S. origin, and it's only one per. It's not the multiple printings. So in other words, it's just ones that are a unique issue number, and whether it has or does not have a variant code attached to it. We didn't get into the foreign stuff. If you're talking about foreign manga, it's not a thing. And then again, I don't want to get too lost out of the rabbit trail of the quantity sold versus the number of issues produced. I'm sorry, the number of distinct issues produced. This graph right here is basically saying of all the issues you could have ever ordered, or that have come out in the U.S. during that month, how many of those were a variant of one sort or another? So it's almost like a collector problem. If one of these things lands in my lap, what are the chances that I'm going to have to go and check out the cover art or a little squiggly signature, or at least hope the barcode tells me which of the whether this is a variant or not? And look, on one hand, we sell a product called ComicBase Archive Edition. It has 875,000 cover art, pictures that come with it. And honestly, the thing, I used to like this product when we first came out because it was just cool seeing this many covers. And when we later on invented a screensaver that would just cycle through the covers, I was just in nostalgia heaven, because I'm seeing not only covers of comic books that, I've seen throughout the years, but I'm seeing ones I've never seen, especially foreign comics and really obscure comics. Nowadays, the reason that you need all the covers in ComicBase is, quite frankly, it's variant identification. It's if you hear that, the J cover of Amazing Spider-Man's number 600 is the Santa Cruz variant or whatever the thing is. It'd be nice if you could look at the picture of it and say, oh yeah, this is the one with, Spider-Man kind of swinging from the web with, Venom in the back, glaring at him. That helps to see that, as opposed to just reading a little description of who the artist was, or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's in a way it's good for business for us, but man, does it put a lot of friction on being a collector. So that's kind of where I'm at on that one. Let's see what else we have going on. Let's see. Oh, and Brian Price says, I didn't realize the Marvel Comics #1 variant comic was specifically limited to the Payday edition. There are actually 2 printings, and we do have multiple printings. So when it went back to press, that doesn't count. The variant in this case is it's the variant with literally the squiggle of the paymaster of Marvel Comics on, and in particular why that thing became a variant is because I think it set the world record for the highest priced comic book, but when it was sold, but it was some absolutely stupid amount of money when it went in there, because it had both historical value as that particular issue, that one of a kind issue, and also because it was the very first Marvel comic book. Ironically, the actual condition of it, not great. Anyway, let's see here. All right, let's see here. Ed Billiot says, I think more people are only buying only trade paper books and omnibuses. Yeah, I do not know the plural of omnibus. I had a long discussion with my wife about what to do with these weird Latin dates. I don't know if we're just being, one point of view is that you're just being, pretentious by trying to Latinicize or whatever them by, calling them, omnibuy. But anyway, I guess the U.S. editorial standard is you would call them omnibuses or something. Anyway, but back to the actual question of that. The legend that we get is, if you're reading like ICV2, is that, hey, comic market's great because what we're losing in single issue comic sales, we're more than making up for in manga and trade paperback sales through the book trades, which were never tracked, in the same way before recent times. And look, I think there's definitely something to that. The Barnes and Noble around us is clearly moving products. Manga has clearly been transformative in the American comic market. It's honestly, it seems to be about the only thing that's bringing any new readers or really getting some excitement from folks looking at for the variety of things. Personally, I'm a little more partial to the French version is called bande dessinée. I mean, there's clear stuff going on there, but I'm also going to say the numbers on that are also slippery as hell. There's a couple of different places doing the book scanning and figure out who's selling what. It's really hard to get a coherent number of what's happening in comic stores combined with that. And also it gets into a weird position where anything with pictures in it starts looking like a comic book for classification purposes. And you have to kind of come to the numbers after the fact and go down the top 200 list and say, well, that one's not really a comic book. It's really a something else. And then people are knocking out the numbers on the sales charts after the fact. It's not a great classification system. I'm shocked how bad the numbers in the comic industry are. And at the same time, how jealously they're guarded. But yeah, just talking to folks who actually run legit comic shops, not bookstores, not things like that. It's the single issue comic sales they're nothing like what they were in the 90s. It's a completely different game. I mean, you can see just looking at the walls walking in. I'm glad that people are still buying and enjoying comic books. I mean, I'm glad for that stuff, and yes, even the trade paperbacks also now, the trade paperbacks and omnibuses are now also coming out with at least a variant each, the direct market version versus the regular version, so forth, where they'll take the same 1,000 pages of comic books and slap a different version of the cover on it and sell 2 different versions of it. So yeah, there's no escape. All right, so let's see here. And Brian says, I think 1-2 should probably be added to the Payday version by 1-2A. I think you're probably right. Send a note to editorial. This is one that requires more knowledge of the particular history of than I have in my head at the very moment. All right, let's see here. Oh, and Grace says, more than one omnibus equals an omniboo. All right. Yes. Oh, this is, I think, omnibus is also plural. Quite possibly. It means like deer. I don't know. All right. And let's see. So, yeah. And Jesse says, I don't know how local comic shops survive in these times. Man, there is no business that you will get more admiration from me for running in a time like this. Because I mean, to be a local comic shop owner, you have to be an absolute ninja as a retailer. You have to have amazing taste, customer relations. You're dealing with more SKU, stock keeping units, than any other retail store I can imagine. Clothing stores have like a 50th of the SKUs of that a comic book store would have to deal with. And God bless. And one of the things that makes comic stores keep the rent a lot of times is they'll mix it up and they'll say, well, we're comics, but we're also games, we're also books, we're also collectible video games, we're also magazines. And at which point my head explodes just thinking about it. And I write a database for a living. So yeah, if you can do all that, keep your dead stock to a minimum, keep the cash flow going, and make the customers happy, then dude, you are a stud. So anyway, hats off to any of those folks. All right, so let's see. And Greg agrees. Tough business reasons. So many of them stock more than just comics, also cards and gaming. So, oh yeah, don't even get me started on cards. Yeah, cards is literally SKUs in the millions that you have to worry about. All right, so that's about all I got to say about variance at the moment. Yeah, so key number to keep in mind on this whole thing, 77.8%. Anyone ever asks you what percentage of the comic books out there on the market, or in terms of like particular issue offerings are variants, it's over three quarters, 77.8%. I would not be surprised to see it hit the 80s within a year or two at this rate. And the last thing I want to say, just as a matter of just the economics of it, is there's a question of, well, why? What's going to ever cause this to stop? And it stops when people no longer buy roughly 200-300 copies of a comic book. And so if I print a variant of something and I have to create a genuinely new cover for it, typically if the artist is any good, that to get the artist paid and to get that new edition cover printed and then assemble it into binding. If my break-even point on most comic books winds up being somewhere around between 200 and 300 issues. So if I can sell that many copies of it as a result of making the variant, then as a publisher, if I'm only concerned just with revenue, that's in my advantage to make the variant, which is why they're going to make those. And by the way, there's variants you can make that are dirt cheap. There are variants that are the same plate, the same cover that was done before, but only the black and white plate. So you're actually paying less to make the variant. The blank sketch covers, which that's great if you can do it. You literally only need to stripe up the logo type and the trade dress elements of the cover and leave the whole cover blank. You have to pay an artist, and if you're printing it probably in one color. There are different variants I've seen that are literally done by taking away or adding or printing only a single plate of the 4-color plate process. So like the green tint variant, which would be like print the black and the green plate and leave the rest of it out. So yeah, this thing's going to keep going as long as people buy even a trivial number of them. So don't expect this to die anytime soon. All right. And Ed says, we like to be willing to share a spreadsheet. Absolutely. Be happy to. Send me I'm not sure how can I post this in a convenient way? Maybe I'll put in the show notes and I'll link it via Dropbox. It's probably the best for what I can think of right now. Okay. And Ms. Bryce asks, what constitutes a second printing or a variant? This is going to get a little bit Talmudic. Is a discussion. Typically, if you just went back to press, slapped a new cover on it, maybe that's a second printing. If you didn't change the insides, I would typically consider it a second printing. If there are some weird edge cases of that one, and I'm sure there are, I would not be at all surprised if our content team hasn't had to deal with that one and couldn't advise you more specifically on that. All right, and let's see here. Okay, so okay, yeah. So and I think that will do it on that one. All right, so let's go back over and let's talk about just fun tech tips, and then let's get the heck out of here, guys, because it's been a long darn day. All right, so let's see here. Let's get my keyboard control back over to the other computer. Oh, by the way, guys, this is probably the last time you'll see this particular computer on the show. It's going to get replaced with a different one because apparently one of the this one's needed out in California. It's gonna it's gonna do some work for the content guys. So it will I'll be clearing it down, reinstalling Windows, loading it up with our standard install of stuff, and then this guy will be gone. I will miss you. This was, if you guys remember, this was my computer before I built my new one. It's about 3 years old, but it works like a dang champ. Anyway, um, oh, by the way, also in computer news, we have in the works a major upgrade to our backend database server, just from a hardware standpoint. We're throwing, I think it's 128 gigs of RAM at it, and brand new. It's a brand new build out. Basically, it's what's the fastest you could ever make a machine is we're trying to go on that one because the database is where it's at as far as the overall speed of both ComicBase and Atomic Avenue, and it's also the hardest one to scale up. Otherwise, you can always throw new web servers at things if you need more redundancy, but the database server is that's where you want to throw all the muscle you can. All right. So moving on to things. So let's see. Let's go ahead. Oh, here, let me show you a couple other ones just while I'm at it. Ever get a chance? I linked in the show notes a list of Windows key shortcuts. It's that funny little. It used to look like a kind of like a clover leaf on old keyboards. Now it looks like the Windows logo itself. But actually, I'm sorry. I'm misremembering that because I'm getting flashbacks from my own days when I was, controlling a Mac running Windows, where that the Windows key was mapped to, I believe, the Command key in Windows. So apologize that the cloverleaf is a Mac thing. Ignore me. All right, but anyway, so there's a link in the show notes to all the different shortcuts that are built in to the Windows key. So in other words, if you slam the Windows key and then something else, they do interesting things. For instance, if I go Windows and then D, it, the D is, think desktop, is it hides everything. All your open windows, however many millions of applications you got open, so you can have a look at your desktop. A variation on this one, by the way, which is kind of interesting. And here's our spreadsheet on this one. There's another one which is Windows and I believe comma, which will peek the desktop just for a minute. So you say, "Oh, hey, I need to do something," but as soon as you start dragging around the mouse, then it brings the desktop back. So you don't need to go and show everything. There's Windows key shortcuts that will minimize all your windows, that will maximize all your windows, that will slam them to the top, margins, so forth. But there's one that I had no idea that this even existed. Windows X in Windows 11 brings up a menu I did not know was even a thing. This is the context menu for the start menu. So if I click the regular start menu, I get something that looks like this. If I right click the start menu, I think they call it the quick link or quick something menu. And what it is it's a list. These are like the most common utility programs you'd ever want if you were just messing with a Windows machine. And this is actually one of those things that I'm going to be using this when I do tech support with folks. So the ways to get to it: right click on Windows Start or I'm sorry, Windows X. And very quickly gets you to, here's my installed apps, here's my power options, so I can see whether I'm being too or not economical enough on my laptop in particular. Event Viewer is it's a daunting but very useful tool that will tell you all the little futsy things that have ever happened in your computer's history in terms of any kind of error that has ever happened to, like, on a device driver level, all the little opening and closing of TCP sockets. It's crazy how much data is in there. It's don't be surprised when you see 200,000 items in there. They're not all, even if they look like errors, they're not necessarily all trouble. trouble. But if you ever want to really get a feel for like what the heck is going on inside, the hoods of your machine, yeah, have a look at it, and then maybe run away screaming. I'm not judging you. System, great. Yeah, that's the control panel that you go to. Just immediately see, hey, hey, on this machine, this was an i9-9900K, 3.6 gigahertz, 32 gigs of RAM. It gives you all the basic specs on your machine, so forth. Just handy as heck to get to that information. Device manager is where you're going to find out all the information about the things that are connected to your machine, as well as the internal components. So, like if you're wondered what graphic card you're running, or if there's any trouble with your internet connection, and or something's malfunctioning, a good place to look for that. These are your network connections. Disk management, so you can see all the disks attached to your machine. You can partition them. You can do all sorts of crazy things with it. Computer management is kind of like the overall shell for all those kind of management-y tasks. It's the thing that used to be there if you would right-click on your computer on the desktop and say Manage. It gives you, views of all, again, these kind of gut-level things, on your machine, as well as, visibility to, some of these common utilities. But let's go back to this one because there were a few other interesting ones. Terminal is interesting because what it is, let me go ahead and get, I'm sorry, I've got to switch computers back off the demo computer so that I get Brian's off the machine so you guys can actually see what I'm clicking on. Sorry about that, guys. So terminal is interesting. What terminal does, it's basically like the bigger, better command line, if you remember that one. So it's a little bit more customizable. It's a little easier to use. There's like at least 3 different versions of the command line built into Windows. There's terminal, command line, and PowerShell. I'd say I don't know if most normal people need to actually be using PowerShell. This is my terminal on this particular machine is actually mapped. So when I launch terminal, it actually goes to PowerShell. But if you're used to the old command line thing and you found it just unbearable, have a look at terminal. You might like it better. And then because a lot of times the reason you'll be running a terminal is so you can do really deep down gut level commands that require higher than average permission. There's a special command just to launch it as the administrator of the machine so you can do these kind of higher privileged tasks. Task Manager, I go to all the time. Every single time I'm looking at a machine, I'm wondering, why is this thing running slow? Hey, it seems like it's stuck with something. What's it doing? Task Manager is the place that will tell you. On the main thing here, you can just immediately see, well, okay, which things are running, how much of the CPU is busy. Like right now, to show you this here, I'm burning a cool 4% or 2% of CPU, 31% of my memory. Disk is standing still. Disk is doing next to nothing right now, and the network is pretty easy, at least on this demo machine. Now, if you saw the machine that was actually doing the live stream, that's actually broadcasting this to you, that one looks a little different right now. But this is, if you're ever wondering, it's just, why is my machine slow? It seems like it's really grinding. What's going on? Task Manager is the thing that you can find that out in. Anyway, so back to the others. There are a couple others that were interesting. Settings is the general settings tab to set your volume control, every other darn thing on your machine. File Explorer is the browsing around your computer, shell kind of thing. Run is basically a shortcut to pulling up a command line and just firing off a DOS command. And then the Windows search. But it also gives you, it's actually kind of nice, gives you a quick way to shut down, sign out. And also, if you didn't remember the Windows D, boom, desktop. And then here, once again, hides all my stuff, lets me see everything, so I can get back and mess with my computer and not just all the open windows. So Windows X that's probably the one that I had no idea that thing even existed at all. Check it out, but also check out the full list. And if you really want to impress your friends, see how many of them you can memorize, because I can't memorize them all. It is daunting. All right. But that is my tech tip of the day. All right. I think we got on here. So we got a little chat back and forth. All right, guys. I think we got one more here. It says, hey, Pete, will this week's content update be going up later today? I have not talked to the guys back there, but it looked like they were getting ready. If it's a day late, don't worry too much, but I will check in with them right after the show here. Okay. Well, I think that will do it for now, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. If you like this sort of thing, tell your friends and like and subscribe. I'm going to punch out and probably give myself something wet to drink because my throat is dry as hell. All right, guys, have a good one. I'll see you next time.